suicide. I caption my remarks as the folly of suicide thoughts. A psychiatrist once told me that most people have occasional thoughts of suicide. Think of that. I was only 25 or so at the time and very depressed. And I mentioned that suicide thoughts had passed through my mind. Anyway, the psychiatrist maintained that such occasional thoughts are fairly common and really didn't mark me as inferior or destined to failure, certainly. Such thoughts simply served as a caution light, warning us that we need to make changes in our thinking, changes that we can make. If you've ever had such thoughts, they are normal. You're not alone. Actually, and happily, less than 1% of the world population actually commits suicide. The other 99% seem to have decent lives. There is hope, even for little old you and me. So we're not freaks. We're not destined to failure or to miserable lives. Most of us are within the normal range on most subjects. Our fears of inferiority are manifested in many ways: ulcers, migraines, an endless list of ailments, including stuttering for some. So we can slip into an abnormal group like stuttering here and there as we go through life, but we don't have to stay there. Even though most speech professionals never stuttered and they don't understand it at all, and they even believe that stuttering is incurable, which is nonsense, their beliefs, their mistaken beliefs, their ignorance does not make it so. Some of those same people used to say the world is flat, but Columbus showed them that it wasn't flat. Wow. If I've learned anything about life, it is that most of us are very much alike. In fact, we're more alike than we are different. Another way to say it is that most people sometimes have thoughts similar to your worst thoughts. That doesn't make bad thoughts good, of course, nor does it reduce the need to resist or to reject or to replace bad thoughts with good ones. All that it proves is that you're not alone. Your worst feelings have likely been felt to some noteworthy degree by most other people. So what? So the odds are that you're likely normal in most ways. Now, to improve yourself in your life, you need to stop bashing yourself 24/7 for being inferior. You're simply not. Maybe you're too tall or too short or too fat or too thin or too smart or not quite smart enough, but you're not inferior overall. Most of us are within the normal range. But it's normal to think you're inferior, at least in some significant ways. So the psychiatrist concluded that it's normal to have suicidal thoughts, and he's had lots of other negative thoughts. Doesn't mean you should accept them. You shouldn't. My point is that to have the best life that each of us can have, we must work very hard every day, all day, on what our jobs are and to control our thinking, most importantly of all, and to teach ourselves to dictate what we think. This is a life-saving mandate, and it applies first and foremost to suicidal thoughts. To explain why I believe and urge you to believe this, I'll tell you a story about myself. In my preteen years, I had been the best speaker in my class, even winning several public speaking competitions. Wow. Then one day at age 15, I was called upon to read aloud in class. And for some inexplicable reason, I was nervous, and I stumbled on one word. The class laughed. I was instantly humiliated. I then stuttered on the next word, and the next, and the class roared with laughter. After a few minutes of struggling to speak and becoming totally humiliated, the professor rescued me by calling on someone else to read. But my stuttering days had officially begun. I came late to the stuttering world, as most begin before age 7, the next most by age 12, the next most in their teens. I've only known one beginning stutterer over the age of 19. He was 25. he doesn't stutter anymore. Anyway, by the time that I was in law school at night, I was married with two children, and I was employed full time as well. I would stutter on very unpredictable and rare occasions, but they were so severe sometimes as to make me wish to be dead. Upon graduation from law school, the first case that I tried in court was to defend someone who had robbed a store and was caught with merchandise and a gun not far from the store that he had robbed. The only thing worse for him than the evidence against him was the fact that I was his lawyer. When I attempted to try the case in court, there were 100 or maybe 200 others in the courtroom waiting to hear other cases. My father, an outstanding lawyer and excellent speaker, Harvard magna cum laude graduate, was also present. I was in a state of abject panic. I began to sweat profusely, with the perspiration streaming down my face. I then rose and addressed the judge. I began, "Good morning, Your Honor. My name is..." I could not say my name. I then could not say the defendant's name or much of anything else. The judge had to complete my sentences for me. I was dizzy. My mind almost blacked out. I cannot now remember what happened exactly. I stumbled about, repeating words, blocking, going silent. By the time the case was over, I was soaking wet head to toe and exhausted. I left the courtroom, totally humiliated, thinking I wished I weren't alive. Remember, I was married with children and broke. I drove home with my father. Neither one of us said a word, not one word. I retreated into hiding for some time. I realized that my law career might well be over before it had really begun. The prospect of having no career and no way to support my wife and children terrified me. I couldn't sleep at night. Throughout the day, I kept thinking about my stuttering, and just those thoughts made me sweat literally and stutter more. A few weeks later, at my lowest point, while doing my daily 8-mile run, I ran across a bridge that was several hundred feet above the Chesapeake River, which separates Virginia from Washington, D.C. As I crossed the bridge, I stopped, and I climbed up, intending to jump. And I stood upon the 2-foot wide railing and stared abjectly into the river with its massive rock outcroppings some 200 feet below, and contemplated jumping, suicide. As I stood on that railing, wobbling increasingly from fear, sweat, I thought about my wife, my kids, one of whom was Dean. What would they say? What would they think? How would they explain my suicide and their plight to others? How would they take care of themselves? What shame and loss would my parents feel? My sister and my brother? Tears flooded my eyes until I could not see. I began trembling and wobbling from head to toe. As I teetered on this railing, minutes passed. Passing cars honked violently at me, finally breaking my spell. I climbed down and leaned against the railing for some time, exhausted, reflecting on my predicament. No matter how desperate I was, I could not know. I could not abandon my wife and my kids. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't leave them such a memory, such an example of such a failure, such a quitter, such a gutless soul. I just couldn't do it to them. I realized then that life's biggest message was that I had no choice except to face my problems and find a way to deal with them, even debilitating stuttering. So what did I do? I went to a psychiatrist for help. Again, I was 25. He told me that he knew of no cure for stuttering, but he recommended that I learn self-hypnosis. And he recommended a short book on the subject, Practical Guide to Self-Hypnosis by Melvin Powers. I've read it over and over and over. It remains on my desk to this day, and extra copies of it on my shelves to give to others, I began giving myself what I call mind training treatments. They were 20 minutes each, one before bed and one on arising. I also did these treatments as often as time allowed during the day, sometimes standing in the stairwell of an office building, in the bathroom of a restaurant. Each treatment consisted primarily of repetition of affirmations of words that, when repeated enough, trained my mind to think what I wished to think about speaking and other things in time. The human mind thinks one thing at a time. When we think anything enough, it will become an habitual thought. My goal was to replace my habitual stuttering thoughts that occurred when I spoke by replacing them with fluency thoughts. I slowly blocked stuttering thoughts by dictating different thoughts. Very slowly, I began to replace stuttering fears with fluency convictions. I reversed the stutter snowball. I replaced it with a fluency snowball. As I did, it began working. As I did it, I stumbled on things that I could do, which we call our methods or crutches, that made it easier to reprogram my mind to avoid humiliating stuttering incidents. My favorite affirmation was, quote, "I love to speak under pressure," unquote. Simple and sweet. I stressed the word love. Secondarily, I stressed the word pressure. I love to speak under pressure. Over and 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 over. I repeated those words. This one affirmation may well have been the only one that I needed, if I could make it my dominant, my only speech thought under pressure. As I did so, I slowly began to speak better under pressure. I slowly began to accept my own words. Unbelievably, I began to enjoy speaking under pressure. Wow. Even when speaking under pressure, I taught myself to think my message and how to say it with more feeling, more conviction, more animation, more passion, more love. Slowly, ever so slowly, my mind grew to love to speak under pressure. And to this day, it still does. I do love to speak, especially under pressure. Many people have lauded my speech to me. I won't grade the quality of my speech, but I can say that I have not had a single fear-related stutter in over half a century. What we love to do, we do well. What we do well, we love to do. To this day, I love to speak. At this late date, I cannot believe that I ever once stood on the railing of a bridge, some 200 feet, over a river full of deadly rock outcroppings, and seriously contemplated jumping to my death, but I am ashamed to confess that I did do precisely that. Now all of that is past. It was my son Dean who innocently said to me one day, "Dad, why don't you write a book about your battle with stuttering?" While Dean had never heard me stutter, I had told him about my stuttering days. His suggestion haunted me. I had already written some other books, such as Happiness in 7 Steps, which I wrote for my 13 grandchildren, really, and the Watergate Rhymes. I wrote 150 pages of metered rhymes about the Watergate fiasco, and they're all satirical. They're intended to be political humor, and some people seem to enjoy them. I also wrote a book, Words You Need to Know and Facts You Embarrass Not to Know, because in the process of overcoming stuttering, I did the reverse. Instead of fearing words, I learned to love words, and I became a student of words, of vocabulary, and I learned there are over 5,000 words in my book. words you need to know and facts you're embarrassed not to know. Some of the facts are things like, what's the distance of the moon from the earth? Simple things that most of us should know, but we don't. And so that's what I did with that book. Then I began writing a series of speech-related books, and you're familiar with some of those. My stuttering has been a long and tortured journey, beginning in my teens and ending around age 30, the actual stuttering. But fears of it didn't end for another 10 years. Still, it's the obstacles that we overcome that become the best part of our lives. Contemplating suicide, of course, was a coward's solution, a spineless coward. And it was totally unnecessary because there were and are ways to overcome stuttering and even become good speakers and build character and make us and our lives something special. But even if I couldn't have overcome it, it was still worth living. Suicide is, of course, much worse than folly. It's cowardice. It's throwing away the precious gift of life. I know many stutterers think about it, and that's why I'm talking about it. No matter how average we may be, we can carve decades of joy out of our lives. And the more that we try to do our best, the more that we love our mates, and the more that we use mind training to dictate our thoughts, and the faster we overcome most of our problems, even including, quote, incurable stuttering. Now let me end these remarks by reading aloud, as is my wont. I love to do it. I love to share inspiring words as given to us by great thinkers. So now, I'll read a song that was featured in several Broadway musicals over a period of many, many decades and was a hit in multiple singers, including one by the great Judy Garland. You probably don't know her, but there was none better on this planet for some time in my life. Anyway, I shall read the spine-tingling words now of this song. Its title is Look for the Silver Lining. The words go like this. Look for the silver lining. Please don't be offended if I preach to you a while. Tears are out of place in eyes that were meant to smile. There's a way to make your biggest trouble small. Here's the happy secret of it all. Look for the silver lining. Whenever a cloud appears in the blue, remember somewhere the sun is shining, and so the right thing to do is make it shine for you. A heart full of joy and gladness will always banish sadness and strife. So always look for the silver lining and try to find the sunny side of life. As I wash my dishes, I'll be following your plan until I see the brightness in every pot and pan. I'm sure your point of view will ease the daily grind, so I'll keep repeating in my mind, look for the silver lining whene'er a cloud appears in the blue. And remember, somewhere the sun is shining, and so the right thing to do is to make it shine for you. Thanks for lending me your ears.
Unlock your voice, we stop stuttering.